Genshin's new 5.1 patch brings highly anticipated rerun characters and of course the brand new character Xilonen, and while some people know exactly who they want to get already, a lot of people are having trouble deciding. That's why in this video we'll go over Xilonen, Chiori, Nahida, and Hu Tao's strengths, weaknesses, team viability, and overall value. That way you'll know which one of these 5 stars is most worth your primogems. After I break down each character, I'll tell you who is the best value for your precious primos and give you a proven strategy that will help you get the characters you really want in the future. Each of the 5 stars on this list will receive a rating from bad to great in several categories, including personal damage, support capability, team flexibility, and free-to-play friendliness. I'll also recommend characters that would make good teammates for these 5 stars, since you often need specific characters to really unlock the power of a limited 5-star character. But as always, if you know who you want to wish for already, then just go for them. This is a guide to help clarify what the patch 5.1 limited 5 stars can do well and what they struggle with. That way you'll be better prepared to solve any problems that arise as you play them. Just know that Xilonen is a new 5-star character, so we will need to test her fully to understand exactly how good she is, but based on the info we have, we can still give her a proper evaluation. Make sure to like this video to receive the blessing of Shark Luck, share it with anyone you think it can help, and let me know who you're pulling for in the comments below. Now let's move on to the discotheque DJ Geo rollerblading cat lady, Xilonen. Xilonen is a sword-wielding Geo support that has some damage-dealing capabilities, but it's her extremely strong team buffing abilities that make her really special. You can think of her as another type of Kazuha, and if that statement is raising a bunch of green flags about how good she is, you'd be right. And while the two are quite comparable, Xilonen does offer things that Kazuha doesn't, so let's quickly go over her kit and how she functions. Xilonen's main playstyle revolves around her elemental skill, and when she uses her elemental skill, she gets out her rollerblades to dash forward, dealing geo damage based on her defense. But what's really important about this ability is that she gets a Night Soul bar and 3 small golden arrows called Geo Samplers. These little Geo Sampler arrows will change color based on your party's elemental composition. For every party member that is Hydro, Cryo, Electro, or Pyro, the Geo Samplers will change, and for every party member that is Geo, Animo, or Dendro, the Geo Samplers will stay the same. So if you have 2 Hydro characters, an Animo character, and Xilonen, you'll have 2 blue Hydro Samplers and 1 yellow Geo one. But if your team had 2 Geo characters with 1 Pyro and 1 Hydro character, you would have 1 yellow Geo Sampler, 1 red one, and 1 blue one. Now all these colors are great, but what do they mean? Well, as long as one of these samplers is yellow, she will automatically shred Geo resistance, and when you fill up her Night Soul gauge by using 2 normal attacks, she will shred the resistance of the other elements on the team. And if you have fewer than 2 of those samplers change colors, then she'll get a normal attack and plunge attack damage bonus. Her support playstyle is much more valuable because you get to shred multiple different elemental resistances, and even though you can play her as a damage dealer, that's definitely not her best use, as we'll talk about in the damage section. Her skill can definitely seem complicated because of her Geo Samplers, but in practice it's really easy to understand, and luckily her burst is not as complicated. It deals Geo damage based on her defense, and if you have at least 2 characters in the team that are any combination of Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, she will heal the active character. And if you have 1 or fewer characters of those elements, her burst will just deal extra damage instead. And of course, she can use the Scroll of Cinder City artifact set to boost your team's damage, meaning she can not only shred multiple elemental resistances, but she can also increase your team's elemental damage on top of everything. This obviously makes people compare her to Kazuha, and while they are quite similar and have a high degree of interchangeability, the two do not necessarily replace each other, as we'll talk about in the rating section. And speaking of rating, let's talk about how good our rollerblading Geo DJ is. Will her set blow your mind, or will you wish that you didn't give in to the hype? Xilonen's personal damage is bad to okay. As a support, Xilonen does basically no damage, and as a carry, she does some damage because of the damage bonus that she gets, but honestly, she's about as strong as Keqing or Diluc. She's not terrible, but she is far from top tier. Xilonen's support capability is great! She can work with just about any Cryo, Hydro, Electro, or Pyro character in the game, and she even does well with some Geo characters. And of course, she has a lot of similarities to Kazuha, who is one of the best supports in the entire game. But these similarities have made people wonder if Xilonen is worth skipping if they already have Kazuha. While the two are very similar, they are not exactly the same, and Xilonen can still be an incredible valuable character that can do some things that Kazuha cannot. For example, she can heal, and also shred multiple resistances very easily, which can be virtually impossible to do with a Viridescent Swirl setup, making her better for certain compositions such as Hu Tao teams or Wriothesley Reverse Melt teams. Xilonen's rating for team flexibility is great! Xilonen is one of the most versatile characters in all of Genshin Impact. She is extremely valuable as a support because she works with over half the elements in the game, and she has even more team options outside of pairing with Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, and Electro characters. For those reasons, it's incredibly easy to slot Xilonen in just about any team that you want to play. Xilonen's free-to-play friendliness is great, and this really comes down to her versatility because she just works with so many characters and just makes them so much stronger. Admittedly, her personal damage and her weapon options are not that good for free-to-play players. However, her weapon doesn't really matter. Her damage is so low already that having a good weapon on her won't make much of a difference, and that's actually really nice for players without a lot of weapon options. With that said, support weapons work really well on her, especially the Favonius sword, so use that if you have it. But if you don't, the Natlan craftable sword is her best free-to-play option. Xilonen's overall rating is great. She is an incredibly strong character who offers tons of value for any account, even if her personal damage is lacking. Her comparison to Kazuha is pretty accurate, and that means that basically everyone who gets her will be able to use her for a long time. I mean, Kazuha came out in patch 1.6, and he's still one of the best characters in the game to this day, and Xilonen is just as useful. And one of the biggest questions on people's minds is whether they should wish for her if they already have Kazuha. And I would say that generally the answer is yes, unless you don't like her or want someone else more. She may be very similar to Kazuha, but she can also be used alongside him, which just makes your teams that much stronger. But if you don't know if Kazuha or Xilonen is more worth it for you, just know that they both reduce enemy resistances and increase your team's elemental damage. But Xilonen offers healing and easier simultaneous elemental buffing, while Kazuha offers enemy grouping and crowd control and has higher personal damage. So if you want a little bit of an easier time with enemy debuffs and team buffs along with some healing, then go for Xilonen. And if you want to group enemies up and deal a lot more personal damage, then go for Kazuha. And of course you can get both and you can stack up their effects, but just know that if you try to shred enemy resistances below 0%, the effectiveness of the enemy elemental resistance shred is halved, so you get some diminishing returns there. Recommended teammates for Xilonen include Pyro, Cryo, Hydro, and Electro characters, along with Kazuha and Navia. Chiori is an off-field geo damage dealer whose abilities are dual scaling, meaning she deals more damage from having both attack and defense. This is like how Nahida's elemental skill scales off of both attack and elemental mastery, so you can finally have a decent place to put some of those defense artifacts with Chiori. Chiori's skill has a press and a hold version, and this is where a majority of her kit is focused. Both the press and hold version of her skill summons a doll called a Tomato that does AoE geo damage based on Chiori's attack and defense, and if there's a geo construct, like Zhongli's Pillar, Geo Traveler's Rocks, or Ushi from Ito, Chiori will summon another doll for a maximum of 2 possible. This skill also has a press and hold version. The press version deals geo damage, and the hold version can be aimed and then Chiori will dash forward once you release the skill, just like what Keqing's does. What's unique, however, is that Chiori has 2 sub-abilities from using her hold skill. The first ability occurs when you tap the elemental skill again, which causes Chiori to switch to the next character in your team, and then allows your doll to trigger up to 2 additional coordinated attacks whenever your active character uses a normal, charged, or plunging attack. The second ability occurs if you tap the normal attack after using Chiori's hold skill. This gives her Geo Infusion for 5 seconds in case you want to use her as an on-field damage dealer. This infusion doesn't last very long though, so it's probably better for most people to use her as an off-field damage dealer instead. Chiori's Elemental Burst deals geo damage in an AoE, and once again it scales off her attack and defense. Pretty simple. So how good is this sassy seamstress? Is she a cut above, or does this fashionista fall flat? It's time to give Chiori a rating. Chiori's personal damage is good to great. Geo characters tend to have higher scaling on their talents because geo damage cannot be increased through elemental reactions. And since Chiori is focused on dealing damage off-field, she'll be able to contribute a sizable amount of geo damage to your team even when you're using another character on the field. Chiori's support capability is good. As an off-field damage dealer, Chiori will naturally be a decent support. While she will do best in geo teams, she can work well in other teams, even if it's less than optimal. Chiori's element holds her back because Geo can mess up a lot of elemental reactions, but she's still a pretty good support overall and does quite solid damage. Chiori's team flexibility is good. She is great in Geo teams where at least one member can make a Geo construct, which is a lot of different types of Geo teams, but she's only okay in other teams because of the off-field damage potential she has. She's not ideal because her Geo application will steal reactions for Crystallize, and they will mess up other damaging reactions, but overall that can be played around and it's still not the worst thing ever. And there's one thing I want to clarify and make sure everyone knows, and that's that Chiori and Navia don't really work that well together, despite the fact that they are often paired together in a lot of promotional material from Hoyo. To maximize Chiori's damage, you want a character with Geo constructs, which Navia does not make. So if you want to play Chiori and Navia together, you now need another Geo character to make Geo constructs to really get the most out of Chiori's potential. But then you also want another character that can deal a high amount of elemental application off-field for Navia, because you need a lot of Crystallize in order to get the bullets for her Gunbrella. So making Navia and Chiori work together can be quite awkward. And when you consider that Navia really wants to be in a team with a lot of Pyro, Cryo, Electro, or Hydro, and that Chiori wants to be in a little more Geo-focused team, you can see how pairing them together might be a little bit of a challenge. Chiori's free-to-play friendliness is okay. The Cinnabar Spindle is an extremely good weapon on her, but it is an old event weapon that you cannot get anymore. Luckily, there's a decent amount of free-to-play swords you can use for her if you don't have the Cinnabar Spindle. And because she's an off-field damage dealer, she can pair pretty well with many different teams, even if the Geo damage can mess up some elemental reactions. Chiori's overall rating is good. Chiori is basically an upgrade to Albedo. She's great in Geo teams, specifically one that can make Geo constructs, but she can also work outside of Geo teams just like Albedo can. She's not recommended for teams that need specific elemental application for reaction damage, like Vaporize Hu Tao or Hyperbloom teams, but she does do well as an off-field damage dealer for teams that don't need specific elemental reactions or don't care about specific elemental reactions, like Zhao teams or Nouvelette teams. Chiori is not going to be a broken character, but if you really like her, you probably won't be disappointed with her performance. Recommended teammates for Chiori include Ito, Zhongli, the Dendro Traveler, Ningguang, Bennett, and any character that does not mind Geo reactions in their teams, like Zhao or Nouvelette. The next 5-star on the list is the little Dendro baby and radish god that hits harder than realizing Hoyo thinks we're only worth 3 wishes. It's Nahida. The Dendro Archon's main playstyle revolves around her elemental skill. It allows you to do a quick swipe for a small AoE, or enter a camera-like state and spin around and mark enemies. Every enemy that is either hit or marked by the press or hold version of her skill are tethered together. And when you trigger an elemental reaction on any one of these marked enemies, it will trigger Nahida's Trikarma Purification, which will deal considerable amounts of dendro damage to every enemy marked in the chain. The length at which the enemies can be tethered and the range of her hold skill are quite large, allowing Nahida to deal AoE damage to enemies that are normally out of other characters' range. Nahida's elemental skill is her main source of damage, but beyond its use in combat, it can also be used to gather plants and read the minds of some NPCs in Sumeru, which is kinda nice but also creepy. Nahida's elemental burst deals no damage, but it does summon a beautiful domain and it buffs her as well as the rest of the party. The buffs Nahida receives are based on the elements of the characters in your party. When you have 1 or 2 pyro characters in the party, the damage of Nahida's elemental skill is increased. When you have 1 or 2 electro characters in the party, Nahida's skill can trigger more frequently. And when you have 1 or 2 hydro characters in the party, it will increase the duration of Nahida's elemental burst. Beyond the buffs to Nahida's skill, her elemental burst also increases the entire team's elemental mastery by 25% of the character who has the highest elemental mastery in the team. And speaking of elemental mastery, Nahida scales very well with elemental mastery because her skill is attack and elemental mastery scaling, but it's more heavily weighted towards elemental mastery, and she also gets a passive that increases the crit rate of her skill the more elemental mastery she has. So how does the Dendro Archon and Tiny Cabbage of Wisdom stack up against the other characters? It's time to give Nahida a rating. Nahida's personal damage is great. Nahida's normal attacks are not really anything special, but her elemental skill is extremely strong. Not only does her skill do tons of damage, it also has really good AoE potential because it can tether between multiple enemies. It also triggers very often because it triggers upon elemental reactions, and different enemies can be triggered at different times in the chain. Dendro reacts with a lot of elements, so this is happening very frequently. Her skill further applies a lot of dendro and generates a lot of dendro particles, and all of this can happen while she's not even on the field. And while her elemental burst does not deal any damage directly, the extra elemental mastery and the buffs it gives to her skill will make her hit even harder, as well as giving your team extra damage from the elemental reactions thanks to the elemental mastery buff they all receive. Nahida's support capability is great. There is no Dendro team that would not benefit from having Nahida. Her personal and team buffing capabilities, combined with the high amounts of Dendro application and Dendro energy she generates, make her a premier support for any team that wants a Dendro character. But when you combine this with her high damage potential and her capability to do everything off-field, she becomes one of the best characters in the game. Nahida's team flexibility is great. The Dendro elements, and specifically Dendro reactions, are very strong and very useful. This is balanced around the fact that a lot of Dendro characters are not really good at applying Dendro to cause a lot of these Dendro reactions. Except for Nahida, she is great at applying Dendro and causing Dendro damage. Even in teams that already have a Dendro character, like teams with Alhaitham, she is really good and a really useful support because not only does she apply a lot of Dendro, but she also grants a lot of Dendro particles and Dendro energy, which can be very, very useful. On top of all the buffs and everything else she brings, she is just an incredibly strong character and can benefit just about any player. That's because you can make so many good teams with a Dendro character like Nahida, and because of how good she is, she makes lesser used characters feel much stronger. Nahida's free-to-play friendliness is great. Nahida can use a lot of different weapons from 4 stars like the Sacrificial Fragments, but if you don't have that weapon because it is a gacha weapon, she can use the 3-star weapon, the Magic Guide, to great effect. Nahida also needs less investment than other characters to be very strong, and because she pairs well with so many different characters, including a lot of free-to-play characters, she ends up being very, very free-to-play friendly. Nahida's overall rating is great. She is one of the best characters in the game and pretty much the best option for any Dendro team you want to run. She's extremely versatile, extremely free-to-play friendly, and also extremely powerful. There are so many different types of characters that Nahida can work well with, so it's really hard to recommend specific teams for her, but just know that she can work well with almost any Hydro, Electro, Pyro, or other Dendro character. However, some of my favorite characters to run with Nahida include Alhaitham, Kuki, Beidou, Fischl, Raiden, Yu'lon, Xingqiu, Furina, Ayato, and Toma and Dea for Burgeon. Next we move on to the delightfully cheery funeral director and Zhongli's boss, Hu Tao. Hu Tao is all about playing on the edge, finding the balance between the living and the dead. That's because her elemental skill sacrifices huge chunks of her HP to give her a massive attack boost. She even has a passive ability that incentivizes her to stay at low health because she does even more damage when you're on the brink of death. This type of playstyle can be quite spooky, even if her elemental burst can heal a lot of her lost health. For this reason, a lot of people really love playing Hu Tao with a shield character. But seasoned Hu Tao players will often forego using a shield with her in favor of another character that will bring your team more damage. The best way to play Hu Tao is to use her charge attacks with a Hydro teammate that applies a lot of Hydro, so Hu Tao can vaporize every single charge attack. This also means that you'll have to manage your stamina on top of everything else and having low health, and positioning Hu Tao's charged attacks can be pretty cumbersome, so she is definitely a character that requires more skill to reach her peak. That being said, she does have an incredibly high theoretical potential for damage, but honestly most players will not be able to reach that theoretical ceiling because of many different factors, including ones that they just can't control. So how does this funeral director who's way too eager to promote her business fare against the other 5 stars? Is she still alive and well, or has she crossed over to the other side? It's time to give Hu Tao a rating. Hu Tao's personal damage is great. Her damage potential is very high, but that's only when using her charged attacks and when paired with characters like Xingqiu or Yu'lon. This will make Hu Tao shine by utilizing the Vaporize reaction to give her charged attacks a huge damage boost. And while Hu Tao shines against single enemy fights, like boss battles, it can be difficult to use her in AoE situations due to the behaviors of enemies and also Hu Tao's finicky positioning. Hu Tao's support capability is bad. Hu Tao is a hypercarry and thus has typical hypercarry syndrome, which means that if she is not on field dealing damage, she doesn't contribute anything to the team, and therefore she doesn't have any support capability. So when you're playing Hu Tao, you're not using her as a support, you are taking other characters to support her. Hu Tao's team flexibility is okay. The only real requirements for a Hu Tao team are Xingqiu or Yu'lon or both, and that's really it. She does do very well with Xilonen, since there are very few teams that allow for an Animo character to swirl Pyro with Hu Tao, and Zhongli is also a great choice due to the very strong shield and the universal resistance shred that he provides. She also pairs very well with Furina, but Furina does not have enough Hydro application and it can be a little bit inconsistent, so you'll still want to bring Xingqiu or Yu'lon so you make sure you have enough Hydro application so that you can use Hu Tao and vaporize her charge attacks. Other than that, there aren't too many characters that work really well with Hu Tao. There's some niche setups, but not really any worth recommending. So Hu Tao's rating for team flexibility is okay because she really only needs Yu'lon or Xingqiu, so she's kind of locked into a vaporized team setup, but luckily she doesn't need many other characters and you can play her with almost whoever as long as you have Yu'lon or Xingqiu on her team. Hu Tao's free-to-play friendliness is okay. She can definitely get by with the 3-star weapon, the White Tassels, but she can also use the Star Glitter weapon, the Black Cliff Pole, and even the Dragon's Bane, which is a good 4-star gacha weapon for her. As far as free-to-play teams, you'll basically just need a character like Xingqiu, who you can get for free during the Lantern Rite Festival, which happens during Chinese New Year. After that, you can kind of just use just about anyone you want as long as they don't mess up her Vaporize setups. So while Hu Tao is not the most free-to-play friendly character to build and use, people who want to play her will definitely be able to make her a strong and satisfying free-to-play DPS. Hu Tao's overall rating is good. Hu Tao is still a very strong on-field damage dealer that has stood the test of time even much longer than other on-field damage dealers. That being said, she is definitely not the most powerful on-field damage dealer, and she has a lot more limited team options than other characters, several of whom are even stronger than she is. And the amount of practice and dedication it takes to master the mechanical skill, game knowledge, gameplay micromanaging, and enemy manipulation required to reach her maximum potential is simply more effort than most people want to put forth. For these reasons, I do not recommend pulling Hu Tao unless you really like her and her playstyle. Recommended teammates for Hu Tao include Xingqiu, Yilan, Furina, Zhongli, and Xilonen. And with that, the ratings are finished, so who should you wish for? Honestly, this is a lot more of a difficult question because normally there is a clear best character to go for, but in patch 5.1, both Nahida and Xilonen are neck and neck for the best character. Nahida is the best Dendro character in the game, and Dendro is a very strong element, and with the exception of Kinich and Emily, Nahida makes any Dendro team better while also doing great off-field Dendro damage. Xilonen is an incredibly powerful support that works even better than some Anemo characters in some teams, and she heals, but her damage as a support character is basically non-existent. Considering these factors, I would recommend you wish for Nahida if you want a support that doubles as a damage dealer and you like the idea of using Dendro or Electro characters, excluding Kinich and Emily. I would also recommend Nahida if you already have Kazuha or Sucrose or both, as Nahida would generally bring more value for your account than Xilonen in that case. I would recommend Xilonen if you have a lot of damage dealers already but are lacking support characters. So if most of the characters you have consist of on-field damage dealers like Navia, Hu Tao, Yoimiya, Wriothesley, and so forth, then choose Xilonen. If you don't have any good supports like Kazuha, Sucrose, or Furina, then it really comes down to who you want to play the most in the future. If you really like Dendro characters like Alhaitham, or want to play relatively low investment teams that hit really hard, then go for Nahida. If you want to play several different types of on-field damage dealers, then wish for Xilonen, as she will often pair better with more of those characters than Nahida will. And of course, if you're leaning towards Nahida but still unsure, you can wait for the patch 5.2 livestream preview to reveal who will be coming in patch 5.2, which happens during Nahida's banner. And if you're still unsure who to wish for, then you are always welcome to come by my stream and ask me who is best for you. I stream in the mornings Eastern Standard Time, and if you tell me who you have and who you want, I can tell you which of these 5 stars will be best for your account. Honestly though, you can't really go wrong with wishing for either one of these 5-star characters because both are extremely good and also account changing. That'll be it for this one, everyone. Make sure to like and sub for Shark Luck so you can win your 50/50s. 50% of the time, it works 100% of the time. I love you, stay jawsome, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.